The brandy was poured before she spoke, and that was the last ordinary thing he did that night. Lucian Stern, Duke of Wrenhurst, had married a stranger at 3 o'clock that afternoon in the cold stone chapel at Wrenhurst, with the rain coming sideways against the high windows, and he had passed the hours since in the particular fog that descends on a man who has done a large thing for small reasons. He had married because it was time. He had married this woman because his mother had selected her, and his mother's selections were, like his mother herself, beyond argument. Verity Sutton, Verity Stern, now Duchess of Wrenhurst, the title fitting her like a coat cut for another woman, had stood beside him through the vows, with her gloved hands folded and her eyes lowered, and he had thought, with something close to relief, that his mother had been right again. A quiet one, biddable, a wife who would arrange his household and trouble his conscience, and require nothing of him that he was not prepared to give, which was very little. He had retired to the bedchamber, expecting to be alone with that thought a while longer. The fire had been built high. Candles stood on the mantel and the dressing table and the small writing desk by the window, so that the room swam in a warm and shifting gold, and the rain had gentled to a whisper against the glass. He had taken off his coat. He had poured the brandy from the decanter the footman had left, and he had stood by the fire, turning the glass in his hand, prepared for an awkward and silent evening, prepared to be patient and remote and kind in the distant manner he believed kindness required. She was sitting in the chair by the window. She had changed from the wedding gown into a nightgown of plain white muslin, and her dark hair had been let down and brushed, and she sat with her back very straight, and her hands resting one upon the other in her lap, and she was watching him with an attention so steady that he felt it before he understood it. He inclined his head to her. He meant to say something about the lateness of the hour, something that would permit them both to retreat. "I will not be the quiet one," Verity said. He stopped with the glass halfway to his mouth. She did not say it loudly. That was the thing he would remember afterward, when he tried to account to himself for everything that followed, that there had been no heat in it, no tremor, no performance of defiance. She said it the way a person states the weather, or the date, or a fact so settled in her own mind that it required no force to deliver. She had decided this, and he understood, some time ago, and she was not asking his permission, and she was not afraid of him, and these two circumstances together were so wholly outside his experience of how a wife addressed a husband that he found he had no reply ready to hand. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You have been told what I am," she said. "Your mother has told you. I imagine she has told you that I am gentle and obliging, and that I will give you no trouble, because that is what she was told of me, and that is what everyone has always been told of me, and it has been true my whole life. I have been the quiet one, the eldest of 5 girls, and the quiet one, and I have spent every year of my life making myself smaller so that other people might be more comfortable in a room with me." She paused. Her hands did not move. "I married you this afternoon, and somewhere between the church and this room I decided that I have done enough of that. I do not yet know what kind of wife I mean to be. I have never been permitted to find out, but I know it will not be the one you were promised. I thought you ought to hear it from me tonight before either of us pretends otherwise. That is all." The fire shifted. A log settled with a soft collapse and a brief flare, and the light moved over her face, and Lucian Stern stood in the middle of his own bedchamber and discovered that he did not know where to put himself. He was 29. He had sat in the House of Lords and held his own among men twice his age. He had managed an estate of 40,000 acres since his father's death, had stood at gravesides and read terms to defaulting tenants and refused the requests of importunate relations, and in all that time, in all the rooms of his adult life, no one had spoken to him as this woman had just spoken, plainly, without flattery, without fear, as though he were simply another person and not a position to be navigated. He looked at the brandy in his hand. He looked at the chair where he had meant to put it down, and then, slowly, he crossed the room and set the glass on the writing desk among the candles, and he did not drink it, and he turned a chair to face hers and sat. "Then I should like to hear the rest," he said. Something flickered across her face, the first uncertainty he had seen in her, as if she had braced for any answer but that one. "The rest of what? Of what you have to say?" He folded his hands, unconsciously mirroring her own. "You said you did not yet know what kind of wife you mean to be. I find I am curious. I have known you for the length of 3 suppers and 1 wedding, and at every one of them you said almost nothing. and I had concluded from this that there was almost nothing to say. It appears I was mistaken. I have been mistaken about a number of things today. I would rather not add to the count by going to sleep before I have heard you out. And so they talked. They talked through the burning down of the fire and the guttering of the first candles, two strangers in a gold-lit room, negotiating for the first time in either of their lives the strange new country of an honest conversation. She told him about her family. Sutton Cross, the handsome, crumbling house in Hampshire with more rooms than coal to heat them, the family that had standing enough to dine with earls and money enough for none of the things standing implied. 5 daughters and a father who loved them helplessly, and a mother who had been, Verity said, the brightest woman in any county she entered, until she married, and then year by year the brightness had been folded away like a gown put back in a trunk, because a wife who was too clever made a husband look foolish, and a wife who spoke made a husband seem unable to govern his own house, and so her mother had grown quiet, and then quieter, until by the time Verity was grown the brightest woman in Hampshire sat at the foot of her own table and said nothing at all, and agreed with everything, and faded. I watched it happen to her, Verity said, and then I watched it begin to happen to me. I was being trained for it, we all were. Be agreeable, smooth it over, never be any trouble. Make yourself the kind of woman a man does not have to think about. She looked at him, and the candlelight stood steady in her eyes. I am not telling you this to wound you. You did not invent the world. But I have decided I would rather be a difficult wife in a true marriage than a comfortable one in a coffin, and I thought you should have the truth of it on the first night, when there is still time for you to be sorry. You said 5 girls, he said. You are the eldest, I am. A shadow crossed her face, and she let it. There is Honor, who is 18, and means to marry the first man who asks her, so that she need not go on being a burden, which is what she has been taught to believe she is. And Frances, who used to climb every tree at Sutton Cross, and is learning now to sit with her ankles crossed, and her opinions folded under her tongue, and she is becoming quieter by the month, and it is like watching a candle put under a glass, and the 2 little ones who are still loud, who are still entirely themselves, and who will not stay that way, because no one will let them. She drew a slow breath. I could not save my mother. She was finished being made before I was old enough to see it being done. But I have lain awake a great many nights over my sisters, and I have come to think that the only thing I can do for them is to refuse myself in front of them where they can see it. To be one woman, just one, in our acquaintance who was married and did not disappear. I do not know whether it will be enough, but I know that vanishing quietly will help no one, and I have had a great sufficiency of being no help to anyone while appearing very pleasant about it. He looked at her a long moment. You came into this marriage, he said slowly, with a purpose I was never told of. I came into this marriage, she said, with the purpose every woman is told to have, which is to be married. The rest I decided this afternoon, in the carriage, watching the rain. It is very new you are, in fact, the first person I have ever said any of it aloud to. And she looked faintly amazed at herself, and he saw it, and something in him softened that he had not known was hard. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. The rain had stopped. Somewhere in the house a clock told the half-hour. My mother chose you, he said at last, because she told me you would never give me a moment's difficulty. Yes, Verity said, I know. She told me much the same about you. He laughed before he could stop himself. A short, surprised sound, the kind a man makes when something true is said before he has decided whether he is permitted to find it funny. And he saw her startle at it, and then, slowly, the corner of her mouth lifted, and for the first time in the whole of that long, strange day, his new wife smiled, and he thought that he had never in his life seen anything he wanted so much to see again. They did not become, that night, anything so simple as friends. He was not a man given to sudden transformations, and she had spent too many years guarding herself to set the guard down for one good hour. But when the last candle but one had burned to a stub, and she rose and said that she was tired, he stood as well, and he said, with a formality that he meant entirely, that he was glad she had spoken. And she looked at him a moment, weighing it, and then she said that she hoped he would still be glad in a month, and she wished him good night, and that was the beginning. He had thought it would be the end of something. The comfortable, frictionless arrangement his mother had promised him. He could not yet have said that it was the beginning of the only thing in his life he would ever come to regard as wholly his own. In the weeks that followed, the Duke of Wrenhurst conducted a quiet and increasingly uncomfortable investigation, into the question of what, in fact, he wanted from a marriage, and discovered that he had never once been asked. It had all been decided for him, he came to see, long before he was old enough to decide anything. His mother, the Dowager Duchess Honoria, had ruled Renhurst for 30 years, first as the young wife of a vague and bookish duke who preferred his telescopes to his tenants, and then, after that gentleman's death, as the widow who had simply never relinquished the running of it. She was not a cruel woman. This was the thing that Lucian found himself turning over in the long evenings now, like a stone he had carried in his pocket so long he had forgotten its shape. She was not cruel, she was warm, she was charming and tireless, and genuinely, bottomlessly certain that she knew what was best for every person who came within the reach of her voice. And she expressed that certainty by speaking for them. She ordered at table for guests who had not stated a preference. She answered questions put to other people. She had, all his life, told Lucian what he thought, in the affectionate and unanswerable tone of a woman reporting the contents of a room she could see and he could not, and he had believed her, because what else does a boy do, and because she was so very often right, and because it was easier. "You will find Renhurst dull after London, I expect," she said to Verity at breakfast the third morning after the wedding, buttering her toast and not looking up. "She will want occupation, Lucian. A young woman always does. You must give her some little charge about the house, nothing taxing. The linens, perhaps, or the still-room. She has not the constitution for anything more. I can see it in her. She is delicate. You are delicate, my dear, are you not? You must not let him work you." And Lucian opened his mouth to agree, because agreeing was the habit of his whole life, and because his mother had already half risen to summon the housekeeper and settle the matter. And across the table he met his wife's eyes. Verity said nothing. She did not contradict the dowager. She only looked at him steadily over the rim of her teacup, with an expression he was coming to know, not anger, not appeal, simply the question, asked in silence. "Is this true? Do you believe this? Or are you only repeating what you have been handed?" He shut his mouth. He set down his own cup. "I think," he said carefully, "that we might let the Duchess discover for herself what she finds dull and what occupation she would care for. She has been mistress of this house for 3 days. It seems early to decide on her behalf what her constitution will bear." The silence that followed was very brief and very loud. The dowager looked at her son with an expression of fond bewilderment, as though a favorite spaniel had risen onto its hind legs and recited Greek, and then she laughed lightly and said that of course, he was quite right, she was only trying to be of use, and she returned to her toast, and the matter passed. But Verity held his eyes a moment longer, inclined her head, the smallest fraction, and Lucian felt the gesture land somewhere in his chest with a warmth entirely disproportionate to its size. It became that spring, the texture of their days, this slow, careful, unprecedented business of two people learning each other in defiance of everything they had been told. He found that she rose early and walked the grounds before the household stirred, and that she had a quick, dry wit she had spent her life suppressing, which surfaced now in small bright flashes that delighted him out of all proportion. He found that she read, not the soft accomplishments a young lady was meant to display, but history and travels and the long, careful arguments of men who wrote about the management of land, and that when he mentioned idly a difficulty with the drainage of the low fields by the river, she asked 3 questions about it so precise that he had no answer to the third, and went away and found one, and came back, and they bent over the steward's maps together by candlelight while Mr. Soames stood by in a state of quiet astonishment, for the late Duke had never once looked at the maps, and the dowager had only ever told the steward what to do. There was a morning in May that Lucian would keep. A tenant's widow, a Mrs. Heddle of the river cottages, had come up to the house over a matter of her rent, which she could not pay, her husband 3 months in the churchyard, and 4 children at her skirts, and she had come expecting the steward, and got the Duchess instead, who heard her out in the morning room with a stillness Mrs. Heddle did not know what to make of. Lucian, passing, had paused in the doorway, and his first instinct, the instinct of his whole life, his mother's instinct, had been to step in and settle it, to be generous and remote and have it gracefully managed. He did not. He stood in the doorway and he let his wife conduct it, and he watched her ask the widow exactly what the cottage wanted to be made habitable, and what the eldest boy might be fit for, and he watched her arrange, in the space of a quarter hour, not a charity that would shame the woman, but an abatement and a place for the boy in the stables that would let the family keep its feet, and he watched Mrs. Heddle go out the door, standing a clear inch taller than she had come in. When the widow had gone, Verity turned and found him watching, and colored. "I ought to have consulted you," she said. "It is your money." "It is our land," he said, and the word "our" was new in his mouth, and he felt the newness of it. "And you did better with her than I should have. I would have given her too much and made her hate me for it." He hesitated. "Though I think you might have told the boy's wage and let me confirm it, rather seeing it before the woman, in case I had judged it wrong." "I might," Verity agreed, with the dry flicker he was coming to watch for, "and you might have come into the room rather than haunting the door of it like a conscience. We are neither of us very practiced at this. I expect we shall get the way of it, and that," he thought afterward, that small unbeautiful exchange, the abatement and the wage and the mild correction freely given and freely taken, was more truly a marriage than anything that had been said over them in the chapel. Mrs. Eccles, the housekeeper, a spare and watchful woman who had served the family 30 years and missed nothing, observed all of this from the corners of rooms with an expression that gave nothing away, and confided to no one but the cook that in 3 decades at Wrenhurst she had never seen His Grace look at anyone the way he had taken to looking at the new young Duchess, as though, Mrs. Eccles said, he were a man who had lived all his life in a house he believed to have 4 rooms, and had just been shown a door he had never noticed, opening onto a wing he never knew was there. The dowager noticed, too. She was charming and tireless and certain, but she was not a fool, and she felt the ground shifting beneath her with the particular alarm of a woman who has held a thing so long she has ceased to distinguish it from herself. She did not rage. Rage was beneath her. She simply pressed harder and more sweetly on the only lever she had ever needed. She spoke for Verity, and she spoke for Lucian, and she narrated to the household and to the neighborhood and to her son the marriage she had arranged, as though by describing it confidently enough she might call it back into the shape she had intended. "The Duchess and I are of one mind on it," she would say of matters Verity had never been consulted on. "She is shy in company, you must forgive her. She prefers to leave the talking to those who are easier in it. She has no opinion on the tenants. She leaves such things to me, as a young wife should." And each time, Verity said nothing in the moment, but each time, later, in the privacy of the small morning room that had become theirs, she would say to Lucian, simply, "I was not asked," and he would feel the old habit and the new truth grind against each other in him like 2 stones. The matter came to its head in June, at the dinner the Wrenhursts gave for the county. It was the first great occasion of the marriage. The neighborhood gathered. The long table laid with the silver, 24 of the principal families of 3 counties seated beneath the blaze of the chandeliers, and at the head of it all the new Duchess, in pale gray silk with her mother's small pearls at her throat, composed and luminous and entirely silent, because the Dowager Duchess Honoria had appointed herself, as she always did, the voice of the table. She directed the conversation. She answered for her son. And when old Lady Marbury, 2 seats down, leaned forward and asked the new Duchess directly what she made of the proposal, then before the House of Lords to alter the laws governing the enclosure of common land, a serious question, asked with the frank curiosity of an old woman who had buried 2 husbands and feared nothing. The Dowager answered before Verity had drawn breath. "Oh, the Duchess does not trouble herself with such things," Honoria said, smiling, laying her hand briefly over her daughter-in-law's where it rested on the cloth. "Politics are not a lady's province, are they, my dear? She leaves all that to Lucian, as is right and proper. She is happiest with her needle and her gardens. Are you not, my dear? And it was such a small thing. It was the thing she'd had done 1,000 times, the thing the whole table expected, the thing that ought to have passed unremarked, as it always had, with Verity lowering her eyes and the conversation moving smoothly on. But Lucian Stern, Duke of Wrenhurst, looked down the length of his own table at his wife, at the pearls at her throat, her mother's pearls, her hollowed mother's pearls, and he saw her gather herself to be quiet, the way she had been taught, the way every woman at that table had been taught, and he found that he could not bear it. He found that the thing rising in him was not anger, exactly, but something older and more like grief, and it carried him to his feet before he had decided to stand. "Mother," he said, the table stilled. He did not raise his voice. He had learned from her that the surest authority does not need to. "You will not answer for the Duchess," he said. "Not tonight and not again. Lady Marbury did not ask you, she asked my wife. He turned to Verity, and the whole county turned with him. 24 faces, and the footman frozen at the walls, and he saw the color rise in her cheeks, and her hands go still upon the cloth. Forgive my mother her habit, he said to her, gently, only to her, as though the rest of the room had emptied. I have shared it the whole of my life. Will you tell Lady Marbury what you think? I should like to hear it. I find I always should like to hear it. For a moment Verity did not move, and Lucian understood that he had asked something enormous of her, that he had asked her to be, in a single public instant, in a room full of people who had been told all her life what she was, the thing she had told him on their wedding night she had decided to become. He saw her weigh it. He saw, too, the dowager's face go white and then very still beside her, and then Verity Stern, Duchess of Renhurst, set down her napkin and lifted her eyes to old Lady Marbury, and spoke. She spoke for perhaps 3 minutes. She spoke about the enclosure of common land, and the cottagers who grazed a cow and kept a few geese upon it, and would have neither cow nor geese once it was hedged and sold, and she spoke about a particular family at Sutton Cross she had known as a girl, turned off their common in just such a way, and what had become of them. She spoke clearly and without heat and without a single hesitation, and when she had finished, there was a silence at that table of an altogether different quality from the one her silence usually produced. The silence of 24 people who have been surprised into actual attention. And old Lady Marbury brought her ringed hand down upon the cloth and said, "Well, there is more sense in that than I have heard in the Lords in 20 years." And the table laughed, and the conversation that followed was the best that house had heard in a generation, because, for once, it was a conversation among persons, and not a recital conducted by one. The dowager said nothing more that night. She sat very upright and very pale and ate almost nothing, and Lucian, watching her with a complicated tenderness, understood that he had not defeated his mother so much as he had set down, in front of the whole county, a weight she had carried so long she had believed it to be her own arm. He did not know yet what she would do with the empty hands. He only knew it had to be done. It was not the end of difficulty between them, between any of the three of them. The honest marriage Verity had insisted upon that first night was not a peaceful one, exactly. It had weather. They argued, sometimes, the Duke and Duchess of Renhurst, about the drainage and the tenants and the schooling of children not yet born, argued the way two intelligent people argue when each has decided the other is worth the trouble of disagreement, and every quarrel was, to Lucian, a small astonishment, because each one was a thing his mother's marriage had never once contained, and his wife's mother had been silenced out of, and he had come to understand that the friction was not the failure of the thing, but the proof of it. A marriage with no friction, he had learned, was only one person speaking. The Dowager Honoria did not soften all at once, nor entirely, but she was, beneath the long habit of command, a clever and a lonely woman, and in the slow months after that dinner she found, to her own surprise, that the daughter-in-law who would not be answered for was also the only person at Renhurst who troubled to ask her what she herself thought, to draw her out, to sit with her in the evenings and listen, plainly and without flattery, the way Verity listened to everyone, as though the old woman's mind were a thing of value and not merely an authority to be managed around. And the dowager, who had spoken for everyone her whole life because no one had ever truly asked her to speak for herself, began haltingly, late, to do so. It was Verity who found her, one gray afternoon, in the long gallery before the portrait of the late Duke, and learned that Honoria had been the cleverest girl in 3 counties once, and had married a man who loved his telescopes, and had run an entire dukedom for 30 years from behind the polite fiction that she was only being of use. And Verity, who knew that exact coffin from the inside, sat down beside her and took the old woman's hand, and said that she was glad, at least, that it had not gone unwitnessed. "You think me a tyrant," Honoria said, not turning from the portrait. It was not quite a question. "I think you a woman who was given one room to live in and made herself the absolute mistress of it," Verity said, "because they would not give you the house. I have been angry with you. I am less angry now that I have understood you. They taught you the only power they would permit a clever woman was to speak for everyone while pretending to speak for no one, and you learned it so well you forgot it was a cage." She pressed the thin old hand. "You spoke for me at that table because you could not imagine I would be allowed to speak for myself. It was the kindest version of the cruelty you knew. I am not asking you to be sorry. I am asking you to watch what happens when a woman in this house is permitted the whole house, and see whether you do not find you would rather have had it so." Honoria was quiet a long while. "It is too late for me," she said at last. "It is not too late," said Verity, "for you to be asked your opinion at your own table for the remainder of your life, and to give it as yourself, and not as the ventriloquist of everyone present. I should like to hear it. I find, like my husband, that I always should." And the Dowager Duchess Honoria, who had not wept in front of another living soul in 40 years, turned her face away to the portrait of the gentle man she had married and outlived, and did a little, and let herself be seen doing it, which was its own kind of first sentence spoken aloud. The years were kind to Wrenhurst after that. The low fields by the river were drained, on a plan the Duke and Duchess had argued over for a fortnight, and settled together. And they yielded as they had not yielded in living memory. The tenants came to know that the new Duchess would hear them herself, through Mr. Soames, and answer plainly, and that what she promised was done. The county, which had arrived at that June dinner, expecting a quiet little nobody his mother had chosen, came away talking of the Duchess of Wrenhurst, and went on talking of her for 30 years. They had 3 daughters. It is the daughters that Lucian thinks of, in the end, on the warm September evening many years on when this story properly closes. 3 girls strung out across the lawn below the terrace in the long gold light, the eldest tall and dark like her mother, the youngest still small enough to run, all 3 of them loud, gloriously and unrepentantly loud, arguing some fierce and complicated with their hands flying and their voices carrying clear up to the house. No one had ever told them to be smaller. No one ever would. Verity had seen to that from the first, had raised them in flat defiance of every lesson she had been raised on, and the result was the noisiest nursery in 3 counties and the 3 most alarming and delightful young women Lucian had ever had the privilege to be terrified by. He stood at the terrace rail and watched them, and his wife came and stood beside him, gray now at the temple, her hand finding his on the stone the way it had found it 10,000 evenings, and they did not speak for a while, because they had long ago passed the place where speech was the only way they knew to be honest with each other. "You were afraid of them being the quiet ones," he said at last. "I was afraid of a great many things," Verity said. "On the whole, I find I need not have been." Below them the eldest girl said something they could not hear, and the other 2 shrieked with outrage and laughter, and somewhere behind them in the house the Dowager Honoria, very old now and very frail and entirely beloved, could be heard telling her granddaughter's governess, in a tone that brooked no argument, that the girls were to be allowed to finish their argument before they were called in. Every word of it, because a girl who is made to swallow her sentence learns to swallow herself, and she would not have it, not in this house, not while she drew breath. Lucian Stern turned the words over in the warm evening, his mother's words, and thought of the brandy he had set down untasted on a writing desk a lifetime ago, on the night a stranger had told him she would not be the quiet one, and had thereby, without either of them yet knowing it, broken open the whole sealed inheritance of silence that had passed down through that house from mother to son to wife for 100 years, and let the air in. He had been told what a wife was, he had been told what a marriage was, and a woman and a life. He had believed all of it, because believing was easier, and because the people who told him had been so certain, and because no one had ever once asked him what he thought, and so he had never thought to ask himself. A door unlocked from the inside, he thought, has a different sound than one forced from without. He had heard that sound once on his wedding night in his own voice, setting down a glass. The soft, true click of something opening that need never close again. There are houses still, all across that country, full of bright women folding themselves away year by year into the trunks of other people's comfort, until the brightest woman in the county sits silent at the foot of her own table and agrees with everything and fades. And there are, here and there, against the long odds of how things have always been done, the other kind. The houses where someone once, on some unremarkable evening, found the courage to say the plain true thing out loud, and was, against all expectation, heard. This is a story of the second kind. It is offered to anyone who has ever been told what they are, and known better, and not yet found the room in which it would be safe to say so. They arrive here, like a door unlocked at last from the inside, whenever they are ready.